The British zone is concerned, there too we started originally with some army officers. There was a man by the name of Julian Leighton, who was a member of the Central British Fund, who was a colonel in the army, who came over there, and we worked very closely with him. He was a good friend. As a matter of fact, on some parts of the trip through the British zone, he went with Earl Harrison and me.
Colonel Leighton?
Yes, Julian Leighton. He's a Jewish broker in London at the present time, and I think he became something treasurer or something of the Central British Fund. We always had very good and close relationship with the JRU. We worked very closely together. The British zone is concerned, there too we started originally with some army officers. There was a man by the name of Julian Leighton, who was a member of the Central British Fund, who was a colonel in the army, who came over there, and we worked very closely with him. He was a good friend. As a matter of fact, on some parts of the trip through the British zone, he went with Earl Harrison and me.
Colonel Leighton?
Yes, Julian Leighton. He's a Jewish broker in London at the present time, and I think he became something treasurer or something of the Central British Fund. We always had very good and close relationship with the JRU. We worked very closely together. But we also had our own operation in the British zone, and especially in Bergen-Belsen, but all through the British zone. And we established contact with the army, with the British army there, with the committee of which Yosef was the chairman, Norbert Walheim, a number of the others whom you know. And we carried on our work there down to the very end.
Yes. Was there a sort of definitive division of work between the JRU and the JDC?
Not really. I think it was a very cooperative effort where we worked together as a team, really. It's just that they were paid by the JRU and they were responsible to the JRU. And as a matter of fact, as time went on, many of their people just came over to our staff. They joined our staff because they wanted to work for the JDC for a variety of reasons, not because they were displeased or anything, but our program was bigger naturally. We had more latitude, and they felt they didn't know how long the JRU would continue, and they felt they had bigger opportunities for expanding service to the DP population, whether it's in the British zone or in the American zone or in another country, in Italy or in Austria. And ours was a much more of an international network than the JRU could be. And so many of their staff came over to us. The JRU resented a little the fact that we were paying better salaries. Well, we had to pay better salaries because we were dealing with Americans. And the standard of salaries in Britain and in the United States is entirely different. That was a problem that every international organization had in Europe. The problem of how you take South Africans, and we had quite a number of South Africans on our staff, how you take South Africans and Englishmen and the Frenchmen. We had some Frenchmen working for us too, including Ayala Flegg and a number of others who were members of our staff. And how you keep them all working together and each one getting a different salary based on the standard in his country when he knows that the fellow sitting next to him is earning more money than he's earning and they're doing the same kind of work. But this wasn't confined to the JDC. The UNRWA also had the same problem. It was a very difficult problem.
Now there is a question here, when did you first meet the problem of mass infiltration into Austria and Germany and the attitude of the various country directors? Now, I'd like to enlarge this question a little bit, because I understand unofficially, I've got no written proof to this, that when the mass infiltration started, well, it wasn't so much mass at that time, but in the autumn of 1945, mainly through Austria, direction of Italy, and also a little trickle to Germany, that in one particular phase, there seems to have been an order handed down from Washington to the army commanders not to stop the infiltrees going through Austria to Italy. Now, I wonder whether you know anything about that.
Well, I don't know of an order at that time, but I know this, that the army was very sympathetic. We had at that time a man in charge of DP work in Washington, General Hildreth, who was very friendly all the time. Later on he became an assistant secretary of state. We had very good relationships with him. I must say that wherever I was, whether it was in Austria or in Germany, and I had to deal with the army on the question of infiltration, I got a tremendous amount of understanding. And I don't know of any cases where the army even took any kind of action, despite the fact that they had a lot of provocation, you know, that it wasn't an easy problem for them. And after all, they're army people. And there may have been local commanders here and there who were annoyed, but we never had any problem when we were dealing with the top, whether we dealt with General Clark at that time, who was in Austria, or whether we dealt with General Eisenhower, and later his successors, McNary and others in Germany, where we had any real problem on that score. The problem of infiltration, as I say, began on any kind of a mass scale, began in 1946, really, rather than 45.
Well, in 1946, I'm coming to it, we'll come to that anyway. Within this early period, there was this big blow-up with General Morgan, a whole publicity and so on. I wonder, there was after all an investigation conducted, as you will remember, by the Third Army, which purported to show that, well, in actual fact, that this infiltration should be stopped. And I wonder whether that had anything to do with the situation, whether this influenced the army in any way.
Well, look, the Third Army was a tough army. It was General Patton, who was a soldier. I mean, he knew nothing else. He wasn't interested in anything.
No, this is actually after he was fired.
This was, well, yeah, well, that may be, but the men there had been trained under him. Their job was to make the occupation of Germany as painless as possible, and to clean up, you know, any difficulties that might arise. I would say that the Third Army, even after General Patton left, was probably the most difficult unit that we had to work with. But any time that we went over their heads and we went to the top, we got good cooperation. Now, it's true that, you know, you can't always deal at the top. You have to deal on the local level, because these are the men who are in the field. And we had problems with them. There's no question about it. The overall picture, however, is one of cooperation.
I wonder why. Why did they allow these Jews in? Was it out of humanitarian reasons or political ones? Well,
I think it was a mixture. I think, for one thing, they were getting, I don't know whether you call them directives, but they were certainly getting a policy angle from Washington, which was friendly. That goes from the president down. know that on several occasions the president communicated directly with Eisenhower on some of these problems. And Eisenhower made personal inspection trips of the Jewish DP camps. And they found them very friendly. In the second place, you know, even soldiers, American soldiers particularly, you had to have a heart of stone. Having seen these people come out of Buchenwald, and Dachau, and Bergen-Belsen, and some of the other camps, not to have been moved. And they were moved. I don't think there's any question about it. Not to speak of the many Jewish people in the army and so on. But I mean, I think the general feeling in the army was one of sympathy. And also, I think that there was a pretty good job done of interpretation. You see, when we began in the early days, you know, with the appointment of advisors to the army, to the commanding general on DP problems, that was a big help. It was something revolutionary. First, Nadich was appointed on a temporary basis, and then Judge Rifkin came over. And we had a good group, you know. We had a good group of people. Every one of them was very good. You had Bernstein, you had Dr. Haber, you had Harry Greenstein. I mean, these were all first-rate people. And they established good relationships with the Army. And they had good credentials. And we were able to do a lot of things of interpreting the position and the plight and the difficulty of DPs and infiltration and so on to the higher echelons of the army. That helped a great deal.
Now, shall we come to the next one? Whether there was a political aim to the infiltration to concentrate European Jewry in Bavaria in order to bring pressure to bear on, well, mainly Britain actually, but on the Western powers generally. Do you think there was a political aim behind all this, or was it just a flight from a worse place to a better place?
Well, you know, my position has always been, and this is not due to any kind of ideology or anything of that kind, but on the basis of my observations. I don't know what was in the minds of the people who were organizing, let's say, Bricha or Aliyah Bet. Anything could have been in their minds. But I have always found that you cannot move masses of people through political motivations if they are comfortable where they are. You just can't do it. You can carry on all the activities you want in the United States or in Canada. Open, underground, anything you want. You will not get masses of Jews running from the United States or from Canada to Israel or to any other country. The same thing is true. You know that. When the Balfour Declaration was first published, and Jews had an opportunity to come in big numbers and so on. And I've heard Dr. Weitzman said that. We said Ayeka, and nobody said Hineni. Why? Life in Poland was tolerable, wasn't comfortable, was tolerable. People had hopes, you know, and so on. People move in large numbers because they feel threatened, because they feel very uncomfortable, because they feel they're in danger, because they hate the very soil on which they're walking. Those are the motivating things that move people. And if it hadn't been for pogroms and for ghettos and for all the things through which the Jews of Poland had to live. No amount of propaganda would have produced the kind of exodus. And if the Jews in Romania weren't as frightened as they were, no amount of propaganda would have gotten them out. They liked Romania. I mean, people, especially the people in Bucharest. Bucharest is a little Paris, you know. Even some of the people whom I met in Palestine at that time were waiting for the war to be over so they could go back to Romania. But when they saw what was happening in Romania, they moved. Now sure, the Bricha boys were there and they helped them and they organized them and it was very good. But that they made people move for any political motivation to bring people there so that they could exert pressure, I don't think they could have done it. Now what is true is this, and I've talked to so many of these people individually before they moved. The first step was to get into an American zone of influence. They looked upon the American zone as the first resting place. And there they would decide whether they'd go to Palestine, whether they'd go to the United States, whether they'd go somewhere else. But they didn't feel safe until they came into an American sphere of influence. When they began to get reports that, you know, they were admitted to the camps, and it was, you know, they were managing and so on and so forth, that desire grew. But if you ask me whether the people who moved, not the people who organized, but the people who moved were motivated by any kind of a political aim.
No, that's obvious.
I don't know.
Actually, it was a question of the motivation of the people who were the movers. But that, of course, is that I wonder whether you could...
That's a difficult thing. See, the movers were all Israelis, Palestinians, that is. Some of them had been with the brigade. Some of them came over for this particular purpose. I'm sure of one thing, that as far as children were concerned, they really wanted, everybody wanted, that children should go to Palestine. Children without parents, you know. There was a lot of resistance to sending them to other countries which might want to accept them. And I'm sure that they wanted, most of the people who were there, the greatest number of them, they wanted them to go to Palestine.
Yes.
I think the political motivations, such as there were, came at a later period. When there was an Anglo-American Commission, when there was the UN Commission, then the obvious thing was to use this DP situation as a strong demonstration of the need for a radical solution.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Now, shall we go over to the next series of questions? This actually relates to the question of the financing of these illegal... Are you...
No, go ahead.
About the financing of these actually illegal operations and how this sort of tallied with the legal position of the JDC in Europe.
Well, it was a difficult problem. In 1945, I came back to the United States. We had a big meeting of the UJA in Atlantic City. That was the first $100 million campaign. And among the speakers were Dr. Weitzman, Eliezer Kaplan was there. I had just come back from Poland. And at that time I made the statement publicly that we felt it was our duty to help every Jew who wanted to go to Palestine to get there, and that we would not be too finicky in trying to determine what is legal and what isn't illegal. Actually, our position was we never denied that we helped illegal immigration. We never denied that we helped Bria. We denied that we organized it, which was true, by the way. We didn't organize it. Some of our boys individually, participated, depending on his temperament, to a greater or smaller degree. Our position was, when we found people in need, we don't care how they got there, we don't care for what purpose they got there, they're in need, we help them. And if we give money to Bricha, we're giving it because they have these people under their care, they have to be fed, they have to be transported, they have to be helped, and therefore they needed money. It wasn't our business to tell them, you should have left them in Poland or you should have left them in Romania. They were on the march, we were helping them. That was our position. And when we found people who were getting on an illegal transport and they didn't have any food and water and medical care and so on, we saw to it that they got it. It wasn't our business to determine the legality of it. But we did not organize these things. We didn't get the people on board or anything of that kind. Our position was that as an organization, we're just furnishing relief. It wasn't our task to examine why people were in need, why they were leaving, where they were going. They need help, and therefore we help them. And if the organization that was helping them was named Bricha, we helped Bricha. If the organization was named Central Committee, we helped the Central Committee. That was our position.
Didn't you run into difficulty with the official government, with the official American government, under pressure from the British, for instance, on this question?
Sure, we ran into difficulties. We always ran into difficulties. We ran into difficulties. I ran into difficulties with some of my best friends in government circles, British and American and others as well. I ran into difficulties with the governments in Hungary, for example, who were accusing us of bringing people across the border from Romania. That we were doing it. It was our fault. And while we don't mind, they'd say to me, we don't mind, we don't care so much. But we're getting a lot of pressure from the Romanian government that we have to stop it. So you better be careful. We had all kinds of pressures. It wasn't just the British, The British were particularly exercised against illegal immigration. But when it came to Bricha, it was everybody. The Czechs said, look, don't overdo it. It embarrasses us. The governments are protesting. It's all right, we're willing to close our eyes, but how can you close your eyes when they come in, so openly? Everybody was making some difficulties. Not always because they wanted to make difficulties. I know that some of the people in the Hungarian government, good communists, were not opposed to the people going through their country. They didn't particularly want them to stay, but if they were going through,
was that the Goyim or the Jews in the Hungarian government?
Both.
Both.
It wasn't true of all of them. Look, in a country like Romania, we had much more difficulty with the Jews than with the Goyim. Yeah. Much more. We had more difficulty with the Foreign Office, which was Anna Pauper at the time, than we had with any other government agency. And we had more difficulty with the Jewish communists than we had with the government servants.
Yes, well, there is this question of your impression of the Russian attitude, whether the Russians actually were in favor of this, or whether they were neutral, or whether they opposed it. This movement of the Jews. I mean, not Russian Jews. I know that they were opposed to that completely, but
well, if they were opposed to it, we never felt it. we never felt it. We had very little contact with the Russians. But we certainly never got any kind of a reaction.
Well, I mean, for instance, these negotiations that Mr. Jacobson and I believe yourself conducted in Prague with the Czechs in June, July '46, it sort of occurred to me that it was hardly likely that the Czech communists would support a thing like this without having at least a tacit approval of Moscow for that.
Well, look, at that time, of course, Masaryk was alive, Benish was alive. We dealt very largely with them, and sure, Masaryk had as one of his deputies, one of his very important deputies, was a communist of high standing. We never felt any interference.
No.
Never. The chief of police, they'd make difficulties from time to time, you know, knocking at your door.
To handle the problem effectively, we went on to say that if emigration facilities are not secured in the near future, most of the Jews at present in the camps in Germany might have to remain there for a long time, perhaps even for many years. He conceded the difficulties and informed us that the Intergovernmental Committee is being reorganized and is working more efficiently than earlier. Until now, the American and British governments alone have contributed to the expenses of the Intergovernmental Committee, sharing equally in its maintenance, but several other countries have now indicated their readiness to contribute financially and help in the work. It is also very likely that the British will refuse to continue to pay 50% of the Intergovernmental Committee budget and will call a conference similar to that of Evian to consider the problem of refinancing it. Paragraph. Mr. Harrison's suggestions can be summarized as follows, 1. The camps should be eliminated as far as is possible, and displaced persons housed in German villages and towns. 2. Wherever this is impossible, the Jews, who are in much worse moral and physical condition than the others, should be placed in special camps of their own. 3. Programs should be started whereby the displaced persons would be given opportunities for securing employment. 4. The handling of the problem of displaced persons should be transferred to UNRWA, and the military should limit themselves solely to the problems of transport, security, supplies, etc. 5. An immigration program should be started immediately. The Intergovernmental Committee should be strengthened, and immigration facilities secured. Paragraph. Mr. Harrison expressed his satisfaction that the Jewish organizations, including the American Jewish Committee, will receive the right to send representatives to Germany to work with UNRWA. He believes that we have a great field of activity there in organizing the people in the camps, in helping them adjust themselves to the situation, and in preparing them for eventual emigration. The problem of securing documents and legal status for them is also an extremely important one, as is the field of restitution and indemnification, which is still wide open and practically untouched by anyone. He also expressed his willingness to cooperate with us. He would like to acquaint the American public with the situation in Germany so as to influence our own immigration policy. End of memorandum. עדותו של דוקטור ג'וזף שוורץ ב-14 באוגוסט 1962 ניו יורק.
Where do I talk? Oh, just like this.
Yes.
Well, first, I want to make it clear that I'm talking entirely from memory.
Yes.
That I haven't had the opportunity nor the time to consult records. And with this warning that, human memory at best is faulty, I'm willing to try to answer the questions that you've put here. Now, the first question that you have is how and why Mr. Earl Harrison was appointed to prepare a report on the DP situation. I don't know the details of that. I was not here at the time that Mr. Harrison was appointed. I was in Europe. There had been a great deal of agitation, some of it begun by us from Europe, about the plight of the Jewish DPs, particularly in the camps. And I'm certain, although I don't know this as an actual fact, but I'm pretty certain that a number of organizations got together and went to the president and asked for some kind of a investigation to be made. At any rate, the president then asked Mr. Earl Harrison, who was the American representative on the Intergovernmental Committee for Refugees, to undertake this study. And subsequently, the State Department invited me to accompany Mr. Harrison and to participate with him in the preparation, both in the investigation and in the preparation of the report or such recommendations as we were prepared to make. We spent time in Germany, of course, in all the zones. We talked to an awful lot of people in the army, in the organizations. In addition to that, I was asked I consulted with Mr. Harrison, and it was decided that in order to fill out the report, that I should make a trip to other countries, including Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary, Romania, to fill out the picture of the plight of the DPs, what was happening. Austria too, of course. And it was on that occasion that I happened to be the first American Jew representing any organization who visited Poland. Because at that time it was practically impossible for anybody to get into Poland, whether from the JDC or from any other organization. But because I was traveling on a diplomatic passport, and because of this presidential mission, I was put on a French plane which was repatriating wounded prisoners of war, French wounded prisoners of war, from Poland to France, and also some invalids from France to Poland. I was able to get on one of those planes and visit Poland for the first time. Now, when we were through, the procedure that we adopted was this, that Mr. Harrison wrote a full report himself, and I wrote the full report myself. And I then sent my report to Mr. Harrison, who was already back in the United States. And he took the two reports and brought them together into a single document. He wrote to me, and he also said to me on several occasions when I came back to the United States, I hope you recognized much of your language in the final report, so that it's difficult to say who wrote the report. Actually, we both wrote a full report, and then Mr. Harrison brought the two versions together into one single report. The report which I prepared was later published as a pamphlet by the JDC.
That's this 10-page report on which bears August 45. Is that
something
it?
like
Yes.
that. Something like that. And this is as far as the preparation of the report is concerned, and so on.
May I before you go on, because the next question already passes that, sort of supplementary things that come up. Mr. Katsky, was he accompanying you during those?
No. Mr. Katsky, at that time, I don't recall whether Mr. Katsky was. I don't think Mr. Katsky was in Europe yet at that time for us. I think that at that time, Mr. Katsky was on assignment with the War Refugee Board. I'm not sure that he was even in Germany at that time.
Well, then I must have been misinformed then.
But he certainly did not accompany us.
Now, I wonder whether you could tell me anything about your first visit to Poland before we go on. Especially on what kind of sort of attitudes on the part of the Jews you found there. Did they want to stay at that, after all, just the first month? Did they then want to stay there, or was there already a big movement to leave Poland?
There was a very big movement to leave. You could say at that time that Polish Jewry, by and large, was divided into two main segments. You had one, and by far the major part, that wanted to go to Palestine, wanted to leave.
Yeah.
And you had another group of communists, convinced communists, who wanted to stay and build a socialist country. They felt very grateful to the Red Army for liberating them. This was especially true of some of the people who came back from Russia, who had spent a good part of the war years in Russia. They came back and they assumed the leadership of the various committees, because naturally the government recognized them and utilized them. But there was a very strong Zionist feeling in Poland at that time. Most of the people who came out of the ghetto, who came out of the woods, the partisan groups and so on, wanted to leave.
Did you actually meet people from the Bricha, or what was then the beginnings of the Bricha organization?
Well, I met them all. I mean, I met Antek and Sivia, who were both in Poland at the time. As a matter of fact, Antek was a member of the Central Committee of the Jews. Adolf Berman at the time was in Poland. He also was very prominently identified. All of the people of the various movements, and every movement was there, from what was then called the left-wing Polizion, the Polizion left, to the revisionists. They were all active. And there was a great deal of rivalry, especially with regard to the revisionists, who were looked upon as fascists. But nevertheless, we cooperated with the revisionists as well. I mean, we gave them the same support, and we gave them the same consideration as far as their activities were concerned. We made no difference whatsoever on political grounds, although we were criticized, and we were told that we are endangering our program because the government looked with an evil eye on the activities of the revisionists, who were considered reactionaries. But we felt then, as we always did, that it was not our business to get into politics, that as long as they were doing a job, either for training or preparing people for immigration, or for setting up schools, or for running various activities on a relief and help basis, that it wasn't our business to enter into the politics of it.
May I ask you, this is not included in the questions actually, because following up on this, we are talking now about the very early period, just after the war. Did the Bricha then in Poland actually approach you for funds for the Bricha in Poland?
You mean on that particular
on
visit?
That particular visit?
No. They didn't actually. First of all, I must tell you that the primary approaches that were made for Bricha were not made in the individual countries.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
But were made through the central organization, which was in Western Europe. In the second place, the real Bricha, as far as Poland was concerned,
yes, that was late.
big numbers, was actually started after the Celts pogrom in 1946.
Yes.
And at that time it began to be a big-scale operation.
Yes, I understand.
And then I was approached from all over, including what's his name, at that time he was Lubjanica, Lavon, who came from Poland and met with me in Austria and talked to me about some of the help that was necessary, and I immediately put through an order for a certain amount of money to be turned over for this specific purpose. But the large-scale Bricha from Poland did not begin until 1946.
There was this case of the children who were being rescued from Polish groups, from Polish homes actually, Catholics and so on. And this was partly organized by the Central Committee in Poland, who had their children's homes, and then it was organized by the individual Jewish groups. And then at the beginning of 46, Louis Siegel and Dr. Magosius went there, and they succeeded in setting up a coordinatia. I mean, this is all well known, so on. But at least I'm relying on documents which I've seen. They may not be quite accurate. But what I'm asking now is, did the JDC at that time, again this early period, actually support the Central Committee on this question of children, or did it support also and the Zionist groups having these children rescued from?
We supported them all. We supported the Central Committee, and we supported all of the Zionist groups and all of the Orthodox groups, without any distinction. I myself visited many of the children's homes on the first trip, in Zakopane and other places, and I visited all of the settlements that were set up from Hashomer HaTzair to including even the revisionists. And wherever there was any kind of a constructive program, this was supported by us. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but the amount of tangible work that was done by Louis Siegel and Magosius when they came over there was very limited. First of all, they didn't have the money, and secondly, they didn't have the same kind of trust on the part of the local groups as we were able to develop. And the other thing was that I think that we really made an effort to do this thing on an unpolitical basis. And they all wanted that. They all wanted it for various reasons, because first of all, they don't like interference in their internal affairs. They don't like to be told what to do and what not to do. And they were very jealous if you gave the Mapai groups or the Mapam groups or the Policy and Small, if you gave them any kind of an advantage, one over the other, the Mizrahi, you had a scandal. They wanted to be treated on the basis of equality.
Yeah, I understand. Right. Well, perhaps we go out over to the next set of questions. Is it correct to say that the JDC tried to get army permission to enter Germany, and that only late July 45 was Mr. Rock allowed to proceed there? And why did the army refuse? And did the JDC try to enter Germany unofficially?
Well, you must realize that the Army I came back to France in November of 1944. And France was in general disorder. The Germans were not yet completely out. There was a lot of suspicion on all sides. You will remember there was the Ardennes offensive, which came afterwards, and there was an awful lot of suspicion and nervousness in the army. It was difficult to do any kind of work in France. It was almost impossible to recruit staff. And having recruited staff, it was almost impossible to find living quarters for them. And to give them an office in which they could work, because there was no heat. It happened to be a very severe winter. People's hands were frozen. It was almost, there was very little to eat. Hardly any of the restaurants were open. And you had to have ration cards. And it was a very impossible set of circumstances under which to live. When the army went into Germany, the army too was very nervous. And in the beginning, they made a rule. They don't know from any chokhmas. Their rule was only the Red Cross can come in. No other voluntary organizations can come in. We're not ready for them yet. A little bit later, not much later, but a little bit later, they extended it to the UNRWA. And their understanding was that anybody, any voluntary agency that came in would have to be attached to UNRWA, that they couldn't deal with separate organizations. Well, the UNRWA was not organized yet properly. They didn't quite know what they were going to do, how they were going to do it, how they were going to function, where they were going to be, who was going in. And we didn't know, and they didn't know, what affiliation meant. What did it mean? Does it mean that we can't do anything, we have to work only through UNRWA? We didn't want that, because we recognized, and UNRWA recognized, that there was a special Jewish problem. That over and above what UNRWA does for people in general, there was a Jewish problem, which was a highly special problem. They wanted us in, but they didn't know the basis of working together, and we didn't know the basis of working together. We certainly didn't want to be in the position of taking orders from UNRWA, because that would nullify all of our work. We were ready to be accredited to UNRWA with the understanding that there were certain things that we would do, certain things we would bring to their attention to do, and certain things that we would do on our own, because we had our own staff and our own procedures and our own methods and our own contacts and so on. Well, all this took, in those days, you must realize, all that took a lot of time. As a matter of fact, the Army was very proud that they got us in as fast as they did. I know that some of them said, well, you didn't get here until July 1945. Now, I forget whether it was July or whether it was June or whether it was May, but it's true that it took a number of months before we could know even with whom to discuss it in the Army. Because you can imagine what the situation was. We decided very early that we would not try to get in there illegally, because if we did, we would jeopardize our whole possibility for future work in the country. We were sure we would get in. It would take a month longer, take a month less, but we were sure we would get in. To have gone in illegally and to have been caught would have jeopardized the whole program. So what we did in the early days was, as much as possible, we worked through whatever available channels that we had. We worked through the Jewish chaplains some of whom came to Paris. I met with them. They went back to Germany. We worked with them. We discussed. In some cases, we gave them money.
Who, for instance, would you remember any?
Well, I don't remember. I know that we dealt with Yehuda and a whole group. I don't remember all. I remember I had a meeting at the Rothschild Synagogue with all of the Jewish chaplains, and we went into great detail and talked about a lot of these things. Then we worked through the army as much as we could. There happened to be at the time, and the man who was sort of General Eisenhower's consultant on DP matters was a Jewish colonel by the name of Schottland, who is now at Brandeis University. So we worked a little through him. We worked a little through the UNRWA people who were beginning to go into Germany. And finally, we reached a position where we were permitted to go in. And Eli Rock was the first one whom we sent in. And as we got in there, and I got in there about the same time, or even a little earlier. No, I got in there before Eli Rock. I went around the camps, talked to the people, I found out what was required, and then we began to do one of the most difficult things that we ever had to do, and that was to find staff. And you had to find, especially for the American zone, you had to find American staff, because the Army did not like to have what they called foreigners roaming over the country which was under American occupation. Now, we were able to get some staff from people who were leaving the Army. We were able to get, we put on a big recruitment program in the United States to find staff immediately. And pretty soon we had a complement of staff that we